We will not bow down. Let my people go. We will not bow down. Let my people go. We will not bow down. Let my people go. We will not bow down. Let my people go. We will not bow down. Let my people
Well, hello and welcome to episode 76 of the Croydon Constitutionalist podcast, bringing classical liberalism to South London and beyond via our YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcasts. My name is Dan Heaton and my partner in podcasting today is Mike Swaddling, the co-founder of the Croydon Constitutionalists. Mike, how are you?
Good, thanks, Dan. Weather permitting, of course, when people listen to this, it might not be so bad, but we've had a week of rain where I live, and the clocks went back and the weather turned wrong. But other than that, good. How about yourself?
Yeah, not too bad. Busy with work, but as you say, it's a bit dark these days and very very dreek, as the Scots would say, as we record this podcast. Well, let's ignore the weather for now. There's been quite a lot going on in the world of politics recently. Mike, what have we got to discuss today?
Well, it's been a long time since we last spoke to our listeners. So obviously there's been a huge amount going on and too much for us to cover. But what we are talking about is Rishi's cabinet. Locally, the Selsdon Vale and Forestdale by-election, a council by-election here in Croydon. And we have a chat with Hoong-Wai Cheah about the mini budget and the demise of Liz Truss.
Indeed, yes. When we last spoke, in a formal podcast, as it were, we were discussing Liz Truss and her cabinet appointments and the way things might be looking for that new government. Well, okay, Mike, you've spoke with Hoong-Wai about what's gone on there, and we won't go about it too much in this section of the podcast. But obviously, Liz has moved on, shall we say, and we now have Rishi, who was the default candidate, effectively, to take over when she resigned, and he's put in place his own cabinet. Now, when Liz Truss first came into office, it was a cabinet of loyalists, perhaps. Rishi's taken a slightly different perspective on that. Mike, what have you made of the cabinet appointees?
Well, it's an interesting thing, isn't it? I liked pretty much everyone in Liz Truss's cabinet, and I thought, there were lots of people that were my sort of conservatives, and I don't feel the same about Rishi's. But to be fair, he isn't governing for the benefit of Mike Swaddling. I feel that's an oversight on his part, but he's governing to bring the whole Conservative Party, certainly the parliamentary party, together. And that's, in that sense, I think he's done something very clever. And that is the purpose of our parliamentary democracy, is the cabinet is meant to bring the various factions in. That's always how it's worked. The classic example people use, of course, is John Prescott being the deputy to Tony Blair. You bring in a broad church of people to form a government, and he has done that. There's lots for us not to like, but there's a few things for us to like. I think James Cleverly has been doing a good job as Foreign Secretary. Suella Braverman back at the Home Office, very pleased to see that. Kemi Badenoch, of course, in as Secretary of State for Trade and quite brilliantly the Minister for Women and Equality. So there are some highlights in there, and also there's Michael Gove and Grant Shapps and Jeremy Hunt. But broadly, he's done the right thing for him and his party.
Well, in terms of appointees, one of our local MPs, Chris Philp, has had an interesting few weeks, has he not? When we last spoke, he'd been appointed Chief Secretary to the Treasury, and then following that mini budget and a bit of a reshuffle there, he became Minister for the Cabinet Office for the Paymaster General. And now Rishi's in place. He's now Minister of State for Policing. So I think we've all had jobs where we weren't quite sure what we were doing from one week to the next, but Chris Philp really has had that in the past month or so. Moving on from the actual appointments, we've seen sort of the drive, the direction of the of the new, effectively new government. Looks like the taxes are going to be going up rather than down. All kinds of rumours about stealth taxes that may be being introduced in terms of pensions and capital gains tax and that sort of thing. So that's whilst we appreciate that the books need to be balanced, there does need to be true balance in that balancing, as it were. But some good news I think we've seen is the suggestion that illegal but harmful clause in the online safety bill will be removed. That's a welcome development, Mike.
Yeah, very much is. I think there's still a lot not to like in that bill, and there are areas of concern. I was reading something just today that there's some clauses in it that effectively make Nicola Sturgeon the content writer for media in all of the UK, which is a worry, because of the position she. If one part of the UK bans something, it has to, social media companies need to ban it across the whole UK. Now, that's something in the bill that hopefully could be fairly quickly tidied up or changed. But so there are concerns very much, but let's not be unhappy about the moves in the right direction that are already being made.
Indeed. One thing we saw enough of from Liz Truss in her time in office was U-turns, some very, very large U-turns. Rishi did say he wasn't going to go to this COP27 conference, and he seems to have U-turned on that. We're rather hoping for some more sensible energy policies, but not a good sign on that direction.
No, they've effectively banned fracking again. We've got a crisis around energy supply, and we've got a load of energy supply under our feet, and we've decided we're not going to tap into it. I mean, how does that make any sense to anyone? Beyond that, this COP27 he said he wasn't going to go to. I don't particularly care whether Rishi goes to COP27 or not. I do find it ironic that this is, of course, a rich man and many rich men getting into private jets to make sure that you, I, and our listeners can't afford to drive a private car. It's complete hypocrisy on their part regarding climate, but regarding their beliefs in climate, I'm not sure I buy into them, but certainly regarding their own beliefs in it. But actually, I think the really big mistake here is a political one. If you say you're going to do something, do it. Or if you say you're not going to do something, don't do it. If you are seen as someone that can give in, and this, of course, was Liz's great problem, as soon as people knew that they could make her change her mind, everything's fair game. Everything was only a matter of time when you apply enough pressure. And Rishi's showing that already, and that's, I think, going to live to haunt him throughout his time as Prime Minister.
Indeed. Well, enough about the national political scene. We've had a local election here in Croydon, in Selsdon Vale and Forestdale. Conservatives have a new councillor there, Fatima Zaman, who came top of the poll. But some interesting results in that by-election. Mike, why don't you tell the listeners what went on there?
Yes, so the by-election held on November the 3rd, following the sad death of the previous councillor. Conservatives won in what's a fairly safe Conservative board. I think this comes as a great surprise. They took 46% of the vote, and that was down 20%. But that's they still held it quite easily. Runner-up in the ward was Peter Underwood, the Green Party candidate. Now, Peter's pretty well known. He's run in a number of parliamentary elections. He ran for mayor for the Green Party. I believe he's a local resident to the ward. He finished with 24% of the vote, 24.9%, and that's an 8% increase for the Greens. So that was a good showing from them. Labour went up 1% to 17%, but Thomas Bowell really didn't achieve much there for Labour. Andrew Pelling, again, I think I'm not sure whether he lives in the ward, but he certainly lives near it. I've seen him around Selsdon many times. 7.9% of the vote. Very good turnout for an independent, and I think reflects his name recognition generally and the work he's done in Croydon over the years. And the Lib Dems down at 3.4% of the vote. Now, Now, it's a good result for the Greens, and clearly the big thing I take away from it is the Conservative vote just stayed at home. That more than anything else, that's probably the thing that happened in Selsdon Forestdale. But the other thing I wonder if what's happened here is we're seeing two things come together. One is the Green Party is very much becoming the none of the above party that people vote for. For a while, I think it was UKIP. If you didn't like anyone else, you voted UKIP to vote none of the above. And now people are voting Green for that purpose. I'm not sure that 24% of the voters in Selsdon and Forestdale are enamoured by Green policies, particularly as many of the problems that we've got at the moment are exacerbated by them. But also, I just have a suspicion, and of course no one will ever admit to this, that Labour and the Lib Dems didn't put their best foot forward, didn't maybe campaign as hard as they could in this by-election to see if they could swing it against the Conservatives and give the Greens a bit more of a run. There's been talk of electoral pacts and a certain amount of working together between these parties over time, and I think we may have just seen a light touch of that recently in the area. Say, you never prove that, and I'm sure they'd never admit it, but yeah, it does look suspiciously that way.
Yeah, potentially. Certainly the Greens, where I live, albeit they're relatively small in numbers, but if they concentrate their efforts on a ward, and obviously with a single seat by-election here, you're able to do that for the period that the contest is on. They do seem to be reasonably effective, but as you say, Mike, the turnout was 29.59%. Normally, you'd expect at a local election something around the 50% mark, or maybe slightly less, given it's a safe seat. So, yeah, I think quite a few Conservatives probably stayed at home. Not surprising considering the current circumstances. But yes, interesting to see how the new councillor gets on, and congratulations to her. And we look forward to seeing how she serves the people in Selsdon. So, Mike, we've now got the chat you had recently with Hoong-Wai.
Okay, so joined here with Hoong-Wai Cheah. We're talking about the short-lived Liz Truss premiership and the growth plan, or the mini budget as it's more regularly known. And we're just talking about what our thoughts were on that. So just, Hoong-Wai, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
Start off just to talk a bit about the timeline that led us there. So on the 6th of September, if we can remember that time now, Liz Truss became Prime Minister. The Queen died on the 8th, very quickly and very sadly, obviously. We then, on the 23rd of September, had the Kwasi Kwarteng deliver the ministerial statement of the growth plan, or the mini-budget as we all know it. And then quite shortly afterwards, we saw the plan to abolish the 45p tax rate reversed. That was 10 days later. And then the corporation tax reversed not long after that. And then, indeed, not long after that, so after a tenure of 38 days for the Chancellor, he went and Jeremy Hunt came in, and local MP in Croydon South, Chris Philp, went from Chief Secretary to the Treasury, and he has moved on to subsequent other jobs. So an awful lot happened, and then on the 25th of October even, we saw Liz go and Rishi come in. So an awful lot happened in a very short space of time. But looking at that mini budget, I really liked it. I wrote on our site and said, what a great it is to see someone that's politics that understand that tax is an incentive system, and the more incentive you create for people, the more growth there will be. And if you tax them higher, you'll get less of something, and the less growth there will be. So I feel, it's a real shame what happened with what I thought was a very good budget. Hoong-Wai, that's sort of my thoughts. I don't know if there's any sort of things you think from that budget or anything you want to particularly talk about.
So I wouldn't say that I necessarily would have agreed completely with it. What I found, I liked some parts of it, but what struck me most was that I found it quite puzzling, actually. For example, a specific one. why bother cutting the 45% tax band? What difference did it make? It's not very likely to bring back additional people who had gone overseas for that extra 5%, and barely made a dent to the budget. It sounds to me like I actually don't know. I don't understand why they did that. The cost of it. What struck me about that particular measure was that the cost of it was barely 2% of the estimate of that cost would have been, looking at your figures, maybe you say, well, here
6.7 billion.
6.8 billion. Other estimates were about 2 billion. That's how much it would have cost. So that's barely a few percent of the, sorry, not a few percent, barely, if you take it as 2 billion, it's only 0.2% of the annual budget. So within a margin of error, really, or it's just a rounding error when you talk about a budget that's worth £1 trillion a year. So what surprises me is how poorly briefed both Kwasi Kwarteng and Liz Truss was, that they couldn't even defend this absolutely tiny measure. All they had to say was, look, this is going to cost us between £2 and £7 billion. If the economy grows by even 1%, this because of this measure, it would have more than paid back over this measure. So there were little things like that they weren't able to explain why they did it. They weren't able to quantify its costs and its benefits. So which makes me wonder, why did they do so many of these things? To me, it's supply side reform. It's very clearly supply side reform. They're trying to ape something between what Thatcher and Reagan did, but they couldn't seem to explain it, and that's what I find puzzling about it.
So it's interesting. I do very much agree with you there in terms of the why couldn't they explain it, and I felt at one point like I'd done, little old me in Croydon had done as much explanation as the entire British government had in favour of some of these things. So taking that firstly, I should just explain for listeners, I think some of the differences in the figures is whether you're looking at 1 year, 3 year or 5 years, and this is always a challenge with these things. But I would question the use of the word cost. What cost is there to reducing a tax rate? There's no cost. It doesn't cost us money. Paying out benefits costs money. Buying infrastructure costs money. Tax revenue is a revenue stream. And if you change the rate of it, you might get less revenue, you might get more revenue, but it's not a cost. Now, if you lower the rate, general knowledge, common knowledge would say you get less income. But I absolutely refute that, and most listeners to this will know how much I love the Laffer curve. The lower the tax rate, the more the tax take, quite commonly. And if you look at this 45p tax rate, I think that becomes particularly true. You're right, I don't think you'll bring lots of people in from overseas. Someone hiding their funds in an offshore account is not suddenly going to go, oh, it's only 40% now, I'll bring my money back. But I guarantee there will be a large number of people earning just under that threshold that are not taking money out of their companies because they will be clobbered at 45%. That are not working additional hours or taking on additional projects because they will be taxed more for that work. And I remember this from my own experience when I first became a higher rate taxpayer some years ago. Suddenly overtime didn't seem worth the effort. Overtime was very nice, and it was nice to have extra money, and often we all know it, we all need extra money. But there is a cost to doing that extra work. You lose your free time, you lose time with family and friends. And if actually the government's taking half of it, I'm not so interested anymore. I'm not so interested in putting that extra risk. Particularly when you're earning money like this, often there's an extra risk involved. And anything that disincentivises that, disincentivises economic growth. It disincentivises those really key, brilliant individuals that not only earn a lot, but actually create new ideas, new products, new services that allows us mere mortals to earn money. So, I think it's a really important thing it says for the economy. But back to your point there, Hoong-Wai, Why didn't the government say that?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very good point, Mike. Thank you. I think I have a theory for why they removed this 45% tax rate ban. Sorry, I prefer to say 45% because 45p is actually short for 45p to the pound, which is just a longer way of saying 45%. Anyway, I think what they were trying to do was to recreate what David Cameron did when he lowered the additional rate tax ban from 50% to 45% when he came into power. And in that situation, they found that when they did that, they got a lot additional revenue. But that was a unique case because that new tax ban had only just been introduced very recently towards the end of Gordon Brown's premiership, deliberately as a trap for David Cameron. Now, David Cameron managed to sidetrack it, and a lot of higher income earners knew David Cameron would do something, the Conservative government would do something to reduce their tax burden at that level. So they probably held off taking this extra revenue in until after David Cameron came into power and somewhat lowered that ban. And so they saw the additional funds pouring into the treasury, if that makes sense. So I think that's what might have motivated it.
Oh, no, absolutely. Look, this was also a trap from Gordon Brown, that the 45% tax rate is a higher tax rate than that was paid by all but the last few months of the 97-2010 Labour government. This was put in by Gordon Brown to stitch up the future Conservative government, and it's worked very, very well in that case. There's no reason to think that what happened under David Cameron, whereby the tax rate came down and more income came in, wouldn't happen here. It happened under Nigel Lawson in the 80s. It happened under Ronald Reagan's regime in America. This is a common feature. If you lower the tax rate, you increase the tax take because people won't work if there's too much disincentive. And we know the converse is true. We know that we increase taxes on sin products, on cigarettes, alcohol, on petrol, and things we don't want people to do. We increase taxes so that we incentivise them to do something else. Well, guess what? It's exactly the same with work as it is with luxury products.
That's right. Everybody knows if you tax something more, people will use it less because costs are higher. But for some reason, they make the exception for the case of labour. You tax labour more, there will be less labour produced. Productivity goes down, costs of labour go up, and the economy suffers for it.
The other, so I think there's other things, and certainly I felt one of the particularly pernicious problems in that's been pernicious taxes. One of the really good things about the budget was the corporation tax, cancelling the increase in that. Now there's a large sums of money being involved in the corporation tax removal, but corporation tax is a tax that we know really does affect income levels very quickly. Corporations have a lot of flexibility over how they declare profits or not.
Sorry, are you talking about income for employees or income to the Treasury?
Income for the Treasury.
There we go.
So corporation tax, they cancelled the increase, and they did that because obviously there was a feeling. They did that because the increase was going to make us uncompetitive on the international market. And if you want to know what a competitive country looks like, you look at Ireland. You look at Ireland, that was a country for many, many years, significantly poorer than the UK in terms of its income rates, gross domestic product per person, that became very rich and has a higher income per person level than we do now, because it attracted an awful lot of high investment business into the country, and it did that by lowering corporation taxes and attracting big businesses to Ireland. We are saying to big business, particularly, go away. Of course, we're also saying to small business, which we're often talking about one or two man bands who are taking great risks with their own capital to set out. We're saying, if you succeed, we'll have that money, thank you. So, of course, what do you think that does to risk, and what do you think that does to entrepreneurship in the economy?
Yeah, absolutely. That ties in very well with all the talk about windfall taxes these days. But that's nothing to do with the mini budget, so I won't go down that route. On the corporation taxing, what I would add is that we tend to think of corporation tax as very similar to income tax, because often people, if you're a partnership, corporation tax is your income tax in many cases. So that the two things I think I would observe about this, I'm neither here nor there on whether or not to lower it, but really what we do know is that to be competitive, or the competitive rate of corporation tax to attract investors and big companies, global companies, is set by on the world stage. So if you have Ireland, our next door neighbour practically, having lower corporation tax than us, then they're very likely to move to Ireland and not here. Even if it's 2%, it's worth it when we've got billions in revenue. The other thing is, I could sort of see why they wanted to do that with corporation tax. I think they were trying to bring corporation tax in line with income tax, thereby making self-employment leveling the playing field in terms of tax rates on self-employment or full-time employment. I think that might have been why, but again, this sort of explanation would have been great if the people behind them explained it, but it felt like they were taking on someone else's playbook rather than truly believing it themselves. By themselves, I mean, obviously, Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng.
I know you had some thoughts around stamp duty and the basic rate income tax changes. Any thoughts on those you want to share? Well,
yeah, whilst we're talking about income tax, the basic rate income tax, I think, is another one that really puzzles me, because lowering the basic rate income tax from 20% to 19% to everyday people who pay 20% rate, it's worth, a couple of £100 a year. Not a lot. But it costs the Treasury quite a lot, because almost everyone who works full-time pays that basic rate. So I've got no idea why they did that. But what is of more interest to me is the stamp duty reduction. Now, obviously, Labour types like to say, the stamp duty reduction, all you're doing is making it cheaper for wealthy people to buy additional properties. I would say, well, yes, that is one of the effects, but another effect is that when you lower stamp duty, you encourage, you lower the cost of moving home. When you lower the cost of moving home, more people move homes. So, for example, if you're retired, maybe even widowed post-retirement, you don't need a 5-bedroom house because your children have all moved out. You want to sell it and move to a smaller property. And if you encourage more of that sort of activity to happen, then you can optimize the market better. If the property market is more fluid or more liquid in technical terms, then it becomes more efficient. If it is cheap, if high value properties appear on the market, then it becomes cheaper for buyers to move into them. So people with a growing family, say like myself, if I want to move into a bigger house for my family to live in, it becomes a little bit cheaper and more attractive. So sellers can offer it at a lower price, or I can afford a little bit more out of my budget, or we meet in the middle. So what I'm trying to get at is that you end up with people living in houses that suit them better if you make the housing market more fluid. And that's one of the effects that I think, or one of the benefits of lowering the stamp duty tax rate. But again, another benefit that just wasn't articulated by the people who are trying to put them in. Why? Can you explain, Mike?
No, I really can't. And clearly presentation was not a feature of the Liz Truss campaign. It's not been a feature of her as a politician. And perhaps the tragic story of her government was she didn't buy in some presentation. So, Boris famously as Mayor of London was good because he brought doers in as his deputy mayors and he done the presentation. As Prime Minister, he wasn't able to have that quite same separation. Also, he was an idiot that ate cake whilst he locked us down. But Liz Truss never brought in a showman to bring this off, and that probably was the fatal flaw around this. And of course, all of this hides the really big thing in the budget, the really, really expensive item that no one ever seems to talk about, which is energy bill support. Now, my view is she probably didn't have a lot of choice. We couldn't go into this winter with people really terrified to put on the heating. That would have led to even more excess deaths than we're seeing. That really would have been catastrophic and potentially would have been revolutionary if people thought they couldn't heat their homes. So not sure she had much choice in what to do, but it's interesting that everyone just seemed to accept the fact that we fundamentally changed the energy market in this country. What are your thoughts?
Well, what I liked about the energy package, shall we say, is that they took a very different tack to, for example, what France did. France basically nationalized the energy industries and forced down the prices. Basically, taxpayers were subsidizing themselves, the energy costs, which not only doesn't make sense, it discourages further investment in energy production, which means energy bills in the future is just going to go up. So instead, the Truss Kwarteng mini budget proposed to subsidize energy. Now, normally, I'm pretty much against subsidies, but if it's a trade-off between either you can have... Okay, so we've got three options here. One, do nothing. Let people pay exorbitant energy bills and suffer, and many people might probably die from it. Or two, you artificially suppress prices, say to the energy companies, no, the regulator's gonna keep it at an affordable level and you all have to take the loss for it. If we go down that route, then again we're going to incentivize a further investment into energy production, because they know they're just not going to make money when prices are at their highest. The third thing that they did instead, or they were going to do, I think they're still doing, aren't they? Which is to subsidize the energy so that the producers are getting market price for it, whilst the consumers are paying a much lower price for it. So again, normally subsidies aren't good because it encourages excess production. But in this case, I don't think that's a bad idea, because energy production has been far too low, probably down to the net zero agenda. But again, that's yet another big topic to discuss.
Yes, indeed. I mean, obviously they did at the time talk about bringing back fracking, which has very much gone off the agenda now. But the subsidies are a necessary evil in this case. It is a shame we don't have a government now that wants to deal with the evil itself and allow us to produce more energy and subvert the need to have these subsidies in the first place. One other last thing I wanted to quickly touch on was IR 35. I've had a very varied career and I've worked self-employed and employed and through various different types of contracts. I know a lot of people that used to be outside IR 35, as it was known, and work in a self-employed basis. There is a tax incentive, and some people may see that as unfair, but when you have someone employed outside IR 35, they take care of themselves, they create some savings for themselves typically, they employ other people. Most I know have also given money to charity, they buy bits of computer equipment. I work in IT. They plough money back into the economy, because that's kind of the nature of being self-employed. And you create a robust interested, active workforce if they're employed on a contract basis. A conservative government, I feel like I'm channeling Neil Kinnock here from the 80s when he couldn't believe a Labour council was making people redundant. I can't believe a Conservative government killed so much enterprise. First of all, they did it when they brought in the additional restrictions of IR35. Yes, it came in from Labour, but Conservatives haven't enforced it. Kwasi Kwarteng's the first person that's had a sensible idea in trying to reverse it, and the Tories have taken it away again. That's a Conservative government who are being absolutely no friend to business there whatsoever. And just to quickly move on, I guess, what's the legacy, Hoong-Wai? What do you think's what's the effect of the Truss premiership and budget on us?
Well, to me, I would say the biggest shame or biggest cost, societal cost, is that Liz Truss has poisoned the well of supply-side reformation. As other commentators have said, it's not that the free market has been tried and found wanting, but it hasn't been tried at all. Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng together presented the start. It was supposed to be just the start of a whole series of supply-side measures which would kickstart the economy and really boost economic growth. But because they didn't have the what do you call it, the principles behind them, I think probably because they didn't believe in it themselves, they couldn't explain it, they couldn't justify it, they couldn't present it, they couldn't sell it, and so they backed down and backtracked on everything. In other words, they've just tried to sell it, something that they never believed in, and they got trashed for it by their opponents in Labour, and now Labour have won because they've just given up without even trying. We don't know what the fruits of those measures would have been. We just know that they backed down politically. I think it's a huge shame because clearly Liz Truss never believed in this. Otherwise, she would be able to explain it. I think she's only gone down this route to begin with because she was trying to win the leadership of her party by pandering to, shall we say, the right of the party, the more economically liberal side of the party. I think that's a huge shame and a huge cost because, again, it's not been tried, and they've just given up on it.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'd quite agree that she doesn't believe in it. And I suppose maybe partly I kind of don't care what her motivations are. I care what the effects are. There is this great shame. There's this missed opportunity, and what really worries me is I sort of have in recent weeks heard the friends and family talk about the fact that almost like they're in favour of higher taxes because we tried lower taxes and look how bad that was. Well, we didn't try lower taxes. We sort of talked about it for a couple of days and then reverse ferreted. What's the future for growth? Who's got a plan for growing the economy? And the point I keep making to people is either you think where we are today is the right place we want to be. High inflation, high government debt, high tax rates, a pretty sort of stagnant economy, and low productivity levels, and housing that no one can afford. Either you think that's great and that's fine and it's working, in which case, whether it's Rishi as Chancellor or Prime Minister, or it's Starmer, or it's anyone else's policies, they're right. If you think they've all got the same policies economically. If you think we're in a good place, then stick with them. If you think we're not in a good place, Kwasi and Liz were something different. They offered something different. Now, you might not agree it was the right thing, but at least it was something different. I don't see where that difference is coming from anymore, and I think that's what I suggested. I think it's the right thing to do, but even if you don't, I think we're not in a good place. I think most people think we're not in a good place at the moment. So why on earth would you want to stick with Plan A if it's not working?
Yeah, I think it's worth commenting also on how Labour is, well, really reaping the rewards of this non-event, of nothing actually happening to the actual budget. I mean, the markets reacted. Obviously, they would, to such a drastic change. But if you look at the bigger picture, it's just a hiccup. Every time something like this happens, the markets will react. They will take advantage of the knee-jerk reactions. They're trying to catch those who are clever market traders are going to catch those who are inexperienced and responding, as I said, in a knee-jerk. So there will be hiccup. What you need to look at is what happens in the subsequent weeks. And as every decent economist has pointed out, just wait and see. And lo and behold, even before the Bank of England intervened, things started plateauing again, started stabilizing again. Yet it's a travesty that Labour were allowed to make so much hay out of it. And I think it's also yet another missed opportunity about how Labour was able to have such a go at the Conservatives about how much they were giving, how much they were taking from the poor and giving to the rich. Hang on a second. By far the biggest spend on the budget was the energy package. It outstripped all the other measures by a long way. Yet they couldn't even quantify that. From what I heard, they had budgeted 150 billion for the energy package over 2 years, and as we saw, the biggest benefits to the shall we say rich people, the 45% tax rate cut, that would have been only 2 billion for the next year. 150 billion spent on everyone, particularly the poorest, versus 2 billion on the richest. That is huge. That's look, 75 times difference, and they couldn't even quantify that. That would have been such an easy win for them, but they've lost it. They bottled it.
They did, and unfortunately, only time will tell when we get things back. Well, thanks, Hoong-Wai. Good to talk about that, and no doubt we will speak again soon.
Thank you, Mike.
So, Mike, what have we got on our website at the moment, and what have we been up to?
Well, lots of things have been going on, just not podcasts, and maybe those two factors are linked. Obviously, a while back, we met and had a meeting in Purley with with Harry Wilkinson of Net Zero Watch and Benjamin Elks of the Taxpayers Alliance, talking about climate, rational action and affordability. The podcast from that was the last podcast in this series, so I'd encourage our listeners to go back and listen to that if they haven't already. It was a really good event, and I think lots of you will enjoy listening to that. We've got a few things coming up. We've got drinks on third Wednesday the 16th of November. Our no passport required drinks at the George from 7 p.m. So that's Wednesday, the 16th of November at the George. On the same night, the SDP are meeting at the George, and Steve Kelleher, the mayoral candidate for London, is going to be there with a chance to meet the SDP. Now, they are a pro-Brexit, economically liberal, or economically left of centre, but socially conservative party. They might appeal to some of our listeners. Come down to the George. You can always meet us, and if not, you can meet them or both. It might be good for you. You might enjoy it. And there's a couple of events coming up from the Together group. They have a meal in Beckenham on Thursday. And they have a drinks on Tuesday, the 15th, at the Porter and Salter. Get in touch with Together Croydon if you're interested. Have a look at our social media and the like for details for them. But you might be interested in those events. But it's not just events we've been doing. We've got lots of stuff go up on our website. So starting a little while back now, I wrote an article on incentives and how the fiscal statement will change behaviour. This was really in support of the mini budget. Now, as you can tell, my support was far greater than the Conservative Party bothered themselves. But it gives you an idea of really what the mini budget was trying to do, which was create incentives. As I think I've just said in the interview with Hoong-Wai, either you believe that things are on the right path and we should carry on with them, and we should carry with the policies of Jeremy Hunt, Sunak, Starmer and all the other parties, or you think they should change. And a mini budget really was a chance to change them. So might be interesting to see what they were trying to do and why I think it was worth supporting. On a similar theme, I've written about the Laffer curve, an article I originally published by Blacklist Press earlier in the year. The Laffer curve is the economic idea that sort of says lower taxes mean higher tax take. So lower tax rates mean higher tax take. Basically, if you remove incentives, people don't bother working so hard. And a good example away from working is something like sin taxes. We tax highly. We don't expect to raise more money. We actually expect to stop people performing the sin. And the converse works as well. So it might be interesting to you to have a read of that. Lastly from me, and I've obviously been busy, I attended the Battle of Ideas Festival a few weeks ago, held by the Academy Ideas, a really, really good event. There's a short article from me on that and how I found it. Might be of interest again to people. If you get the chance to go next year, I would highly recommend it. Some great stars of politics and our sort of politics there, and really interesting ideas exchanged, so well worth seeing. But away from me, we've got a couple of really good articles. Firstly, by Jerry Wraith, who some of you may know, writing about the EU and why do some people want to stay in the EU. And really, the article looks at the costs and the way, frankly, we were fleeced by being members of the European Union. I think a lot of you will enjoy reading that and enjoy understanding some of the detail behind that, and enjoy not because it happened, but enjoy just really reviewing those arguments that so many of us know so well. And then lastly, we had an interview with Steve McNamara, who's a political activist from Scotland, used to be part of the Scottish Libertarians, is now part of a new party called, working for a new party called Choice. He's been involved in a number of campaigns. He's very active online and indeed physically. He's run for office a number of times. And a talk about how he's been involved in politics, some of his views, some information about the new party. Again, well worth a read, and hopefully you enjoy it.
Well, if you would like to write for our website or have any stories that you'd like us to cover, please do contact us. You can do so via the Twitter @CroydonConst, via our Facebook page, via our website, croydonconstitutionalist.uk, or via email, croydonconstitutionalists@gmail.com. Well, do please subscribe to the podcast and the podcast and our YouTube channel. Do please like, share, and leave a review. It's always good to get feedback, and it helps others to find the podcast. I'd like to say thank you once again to Hoong-Wai for his views on the mini budget and discussing them with Mike. I'd like to thank you all for listening. Until next time, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.
Stay free, everybody.